Let's see if we can get this Al Gore video to play. We've had a lot of problem with video playback recently, but hopefully this one works. I tried to preload it. Al Gore just sounding insane.
Oh, the climate deniers
Can you hear that?
are really in some ways similar to all of those almost 400 law enforcement officers in Uvalde, Texas, who were waiting outside an unlocked door while the children were being massacred. They heard the screams, they heard the gunshots, and nobody stepped forward. And God bless those families who suffered so much. And law enforcement officials tell us that's not typical of what law enforcement usually does. And confronted with this global emergency, what we're doing with our inaction and failing to walk through the door and stop the killing is not typical of what we are capable of as human beings. We do have the solutions, and I think these extreme events that are getting steadily worse and more severe are really beginning to change minds. We have to have unity as a nation to come together and stop making this a political football. It shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Give me all your money, he says, Eric Butler. That's completely insane. And he's like, oh, and those poor families. If you really cared about the poor families, then you wouldn't be using them as a political tool to further your agenda. What Al Gore is unable to say for some reason, Eric, is that all of his predictions did not come true. If you go back and you watch anything from An Inconvenient Truth, they're all wrong, and he needs a way to become right. I don't know how he's even getting time at this point. It's painfully obvious that his whole agenda was to get money through green. Maybe it's because they're shelling out a lot of that money now. But for him to say, you not doing anything and the climate slowly changing, which is his claim, that the climate's getting worse and worse. So climate getting worse and worse over time is the same as children being murdered and cops not doing anything about it. That's the equivalent to him. And then he has the audacity to say, oh, those poor families. You just stepped all over them by using them to further your agenda. But I guess we're supposed to believe, Eric, that it's not just his agenda. He's doing this out of the goodness of his heart. And he tried to warn us in 2002 or 2004, whenever it was. But even though none of my predictions came through or came true, you should still believe me now that I'm not talking bullshit and I'm not just over-exaggerating everything. We need the money now, Eric, or else we're all going to die, just like in Texas. It's the same thing.
Yeah, and dude, it's absolutely pathetic, bro, because we've seen now, and this is why they call it climate change, and they switch from global warming. I don't know how. I don't remember like when it officially like switched from global warming to climate change, but there's
parts sometime after the ozone layer.
The ozone layer where you couldn't use aerosol or hairspray or whatever. But it's like in California when there's a drought, which happens like every year, and they say, okay, there's a drought, that's climate change. And then you go somewhere else in another part of the country and there's a flood, and that's also climate change. So the extreme heat is climate change. So they'll scare you. They'll pop out and say, well, oh, look, this crazy heat wave is because of climate change. But then when it gets cold and somebody a climate denier, quote unquote, says, oh, well, how about that climate change? They'll say, well, weather is not climate. So when it's really hot, they can say climate change. But when it gets cold, they say, well, weather is different from climate. And even the phrase climate denier, I mean, come on, bro. It's so obviously transparent. Like, first of all, nobody denies that the climate exists. Like a climate denier, you mean somebody who just doesn't buy your line of crap. That's all that means. And then, like you said, oh yeah, God bless these families. And I feel deeply for them. But now in the very next sentence, he's going to use it as a political football. Before a couple sentences later, he'll say, well, this isn't a partisan issue. It's so clearly a partisan issue, bro. It's literally a Democrat like fear mongering, scare tactic that's decades old. And he really wants us to believe that like, bro, oh, people will die. That's literally it. That's their argument for basically everything. If you don't get the shot, people will die. If you don't wear a mask, people will die. If you don't use the pronouns, people will die. If you drive a truck, people will die. It's every single thing. I mean, even the monkeypox now. If you don't get the shot for every single thing, which I assume for the record, I think last week we spoke and you guys weren't really doing the monkeypox hysteria, but now I feel like you're going to have to because the WHO says you have to, and I'm sure Trudeau will. But anyways, their thing is that every single thing that you choose to disagree with them on will cause somebody to die. And then he talks about like, oh, well, we as a nation need to come together. It's like, well, first of all, it's you. It's a small portion of you guys who live in Martha's Vineyard and fly around on private jets. So that's the most obvious thing. But is this not a global problem, right? It used to be called global warming. You change that, but we're not going to come together as the United States and stop the entire world from overheating or cooling down or whatever it is you say is happening. Shouldn't that be a global effort? I'm not, especially considering you won't even lead by example because you guys still fly around in private jets. So this guy is an absolute scumbag, bro. Like, I don't know any other way to put it than him invoking the shooting in Uvalde to say that we need to work on climate change. Give me a break, guys. Like, I don't even, I mean, genuine question, like who's still buying this? Does somebody actually see that and say, you know what, he's right, we need to it's like you're preaching to the choir. That's not selling anybody on your point. You're not making any point. You're not winning over any hearts. You're just preaching to your people who already blindly believe you because you're on MSNBC or whatever. But that's no way to actually get somebody who is a Second Amendment advocate or anybody who's even just mildly common sense, not even fully conservative, can look at that and say, oh yeah, I guess. I mean, he's just talking to the extremists, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. He's talking to the people who are already going to cement themselves to the ground and glue themselves to a basketball court. It's absolutely insulting, bro. I can't say enough about it.